Hello, hi, and welcome to Spaminar. So this is our monthly online gathering for live theater prop professionals and anyone interested in stage props, and a special extra welcome to our arts educators here tonight. We are so glad you're here. My name is Erin Prather. I am a SPAM member, and I am the prop director at Hartford Stage here in Hartford, Connecticut. So a little bit about SPAM. SPAM was formed in 1994 to create a fellowship among prop professionals to address issues of common importance to create parity with other production areas. We're an association of professional prop educators and managers from non-for-profit producing organizations with an international communication and support network that shares resources, information, solutions, techniques, as well as safety information, continuing education, and we share our stocks with each other too. So we promote the highest professional standards among prop artisans and craftspeople and the field of props to potential props professionals, while working to establish educational standards for the training of props artisans. We now have over 150 active members, reaching from Hawaii to Ireland and from Canada all the way down to Florida. So as with previous Spaminars, we are requesting pay what you can donations to help support this programming and our annual grants for early career prop professionals. If you can't afford to donate, the link, or if you can't afford to donate, sorry, the link will be in the chat during the session, and we truly appreciate any and all help that you can give. Link is in the chat right now. So we have enabled live transcriptions for this webinar. If you'd like to use them, click on the live transcript button down at the bottom and then select show subtitle. Alternatively, you can click view full transcript to see it in the meeting side panel. That's a little bit easier for you to access. So tonight, Larry Heyman will be talking with us about how to break the red pen and fix grading practices in the arts-based classroom. A little bit about Larry. Larry is an associate professor in properties design and fabrication and a lecturer in the design program at the Oklahoma City University School of Theater. In addition to teaching, Larry has worked in props departments at the La Jolla Playhouse, the Goodman Theater, the Huntington Theater, and the Utah Shakespeare Festival, and as a freelance set decorator, dresser, and greensman on multiple feature films, including Rushmore, Hope Floats, Varsity Blues, and Miss Congeniality. His work has been seen in the art departments of trade shows for Mercedes-Benz USA and Toyota. He received his MFA specifically in props design from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign after completing a BFA in design and technical production at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. I am your moderator and host for the evening. So if you have any questions, and we hope that you have questions, please go ahead and post them in the chat, and I will make sure to pose them to Larry during our Q&A following his presentation. So be sure to stick around to the end to hear about upcoming Spaminars and other ways that you can interact and learn from our membership. And so with all of that, let's get started. Larry, you're here, you're ready to go, and you're ready, and it's all coming over to you.
Well, we'll see about that. Thank you so much, Erin. That was amazing, and thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. So, as Erin mentioned, I'm an arts educator. I'm working currently in the School of Theater at the at Oklahoma City University, and I've done some. I've been thinking about grading for a while. I worked as a classroom teacher briefly as sort of a hiatus from working in theater and film and television. And I spent some time just thinking about and doing some research about how and why we grade. And it was pretty enlightening, because one of the things that I have discovered moving into the university world is that a lot of people don't really think very much about grading. In fact, a lot of professors that you talk to will tell you that they give assignments and then they grade them, and they don't really think very much about the intermediate steps. And so I want to just talk a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. and I'm going to take you through just some slides, some ideas, some data that I've encountered, some data that I've harvested, and just some both anecdotal and research-based information. So let me just share my screen really quickly. Share that. There we go. And hopefully everybody can see that. So this is just the slideshow, and I always start off with a little quote. I like this quote because a lot of the time grading doesn't have to do with seeking new media. It's just looking at whatever you're grading with fresh eyes, looking at it as though you hadn't looked at it before. So this always sticks with me. The real voyage of discovery consists not of seeking new landscapes, but of having new eyes, and it's one of my favorites. So here's what I want you guys to come away with. I want you all at the end, when we're done, I want you to recognize the need to critically examine established grading practices, appreciate the complexity of grading, identify the purpose for grading, know several basic perspectives on grading in the arts, recognize common issues that arise with student grading, and then understand, I mean, just be able to look at your own grading practices if you are an arts educator. Just be able to look at your own grading practices and have an understanding of, one, being super critical of yourself and being able to admit, you know what, I might need to go back and take a look at this and figure out how to fix it. Part of education in general, part of educating, part of teaching is constant self-reflection and constant sort of rebuilding what you're doing. And I know that for me personally, each time I enter a new semester, I don't start completely from scratch, but I do revise some of what I'm teaching. So I always want to make sure that I'm doing that. And then finally, understand the value of rubrics and in creative grading. And I'm going to explain all of this, but here's one of the big questions that I often ask. And honestly, you get an interesting variety of answers when you ask other people why they grade. Here are the reasons that in terms of best practices, most educators agree are the reasons for grading. The first is to communicate achievement. The second is to give feedback to students for self-evaluation. The third is to evaluate your instructional effectiveness. For instance, if I give a test, and I don't often do that in an arts-based classroom, but if I should give a test and I'm going through and grading the exam, and I see that there's one question that literally everybody in the class got wrong, the immediate assumption shouldn't be that the students didn't know what they were doing. The assumption should be that it was either a poorly worded question, it wasn't taught properly, or I didn't focus on the topic that is being assessed. And that's just an admission, that's just a recognition that grading can be prescriptive. Grading can help an educator understand what they need to do better. It provides pathways of instruction for varying skill levels. Grading allows me to look at students as individuals. And one of the big challenges is getting educators to get out of the students are a gigantic sort of amorphous blob of people, and they are actually individuals who achieve at different levels. And so if you construct that bell curve in your classroom of the low to moderate achievers, the average achievers, and the very high achievers, you have to understand how to meet the needs of all of those students. And it shouldn't just be comparing the high achievers to the low achievers. That's not what we're doing. It offers feedback to instructor regarding instructional efficacy. That goes back to what I said earlier. And then, of course, to a certain extent, a very small piece of grading is incentive. It is an opportunity for a student to basically examine, develop, and then express what they've learned in the class. And the grades are the incentive to do that well. And if you're grading properly, it's intrinsic. So here's something that's interesting, though, because I did this a couple of years ago, and then I revisited it again. Just sending out 400 postcards to educators, both in high school and higher education. 400 postcards, getting back about 100 responses, so a 25% response. A simple question, two questions. Do you use a red pen when you grade? Was the first question, and why? 70% answered. So I sent out I think I sent out 400. I got about 100 back, and some of the answers were kind of sloppy and not really usable. And so of that, I gleaned out 70% of the answers, and I broke it down in this way. 46% of the 70% said that it was because of that's how they've been graded. 33% said it was provided for them. The red pen was simply given to them in their supplies, and they took it and used it. 10% said they didn't really know, and 11% said they were advised or guided by mentors or peers. Now, a lot of people think that I focus a little bit too heavily on red pens, on the color of the ink, but there's actually a method to it. Why does ink color matter? A lot of people say it doesn't. If you look into cross-cultural classrooms, red is a color that provokes a strong psychophysical response, and in some cultures, including Asian cultures, it's symbolic of death and it's considered incredibly bad luck. But the larger issue for me is if you don't know why you're using a red pen, what else haven't you thought about in your grading? Like, what else have you not, what other decisions have you not made? And so that's what sort of drove me forward with this whole process. So as an educator, I'm constantly trying to get an idea of how to best meet the needs of the students. And in my experience, and this isn't just my experience, this is based on research from a guy named Robert Marzano, who's a pretty big instructional researcher. You can find lots of books by him. He wrote one. I'm gonna give you some resources at the end, but he wrote a fantastic book called Transforming Classroom Grading. And he's written articles about classroom grading that matters. There's another guy named Ken O'Connor who's called the Grade Doctor, who actually talks about some of the fallacies of some of the more confusing grading constructs. I'm not going to talk about them, but I do want to mention their names because, man, if you want to read some good stuff about grading, those are the two guys to look for. So, the three questions that you need to ask as you're planning a lesson are, what do I want my students to learn? How will I know when they've learned it? And then what do I do if they didn't learn it? Simple, right? So the question, what do I want my students to learn? Well, those are called goals and objectives, and you generally construct that usually at the beginning of the class. How will I know when they've learned it? Depending on the classroom, it may be project-based, or it may be, document-based. You may ask the students to write and take exams, or you may ask them to do projects if we're in an arts-based classroom. And you may get a variety of responses, answers, ways of doing things. And you may see students who totally get it like that, and then other students who struggle. So how do you manage that? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit. Let me just go back. So how do you manage that? I'm going to talk a little bit about this. My slides are a little out of order, and I'm not really sure why, but I'm going to go ahead and jump on to the next slide, which is what we shouldn't be doing when we're grading. Okay, because this is super important, and this strikes me very, very, very sort of close to the heart for a couple of reasons. One, because I have close acquaintance with some students who are neurodivergent, and they don't learn the same way. They don't have learning disabilities, and there's no ability issue. It's just that they take on information differently. And so many classrooms are set to a standard American classroom model where you do work, you turn it in, you get a grade, and you do more work. And so I want to talk about this a little bit. So the three questions: what do I want my students to learn? How will I know when they've learned it? And what will I do if they do not learn it? We're going to come back to that. So I want to stick a pin in that, and I want everybody to remember that. But here's what we shouldn't be doing with grades. Grades shouldn't be used to place blame. There shouldn't be any negative consequence, any negative context for grading. Too often, I hear stories, just anecdotally from people talking about, well, they thought they knew what they were doing, and I'm going to show them they didn't. That shouldn't be the goal of grading, okay? Grading shouldn't be used to place blame. It shouldn't be used to compare students. You shouldn't, at no point in your grading structure should you be saying, everybody else in the class had no problem achieving this, therefore, because you didn't achieve it, I'm going to give you an F. That's not what grades should be used for. Grading has to be communication of individual student achievement. They shouldn't be used to impede understanding. And I'm just always stunned and I'm going to talk about how this happens. But I'm always stunned when grades are so convoluted and confusing that it causes the student to question whether or not they actually even understood what they were supposed to be learning. And that goes back to those three questions. They should never be used as punishment. There should never be a time where you're gleefully pulling out your red pen and making marks on a student's paper or making marks on a student's work simply because you want to teach that student a lesson. Teachers, professors, educators are all human. I fully acknowledge that. We have likes and dislikes. There are students who will occasionally get under our skin. At no point should your grading be used to do anything but communicate that student's achievement. And if it is, you need to take a step back and you need to seriously consider why you're doing what you're doing, why you're teaching. They shouldn't be related to anything other than course content. This one drives me nuts. Um, Fonts, professors who have a very specific need for the typeface that the work is printed in, professors who fixate on ink color, professors who fixate on the formatting of how you write your name, professors who fixate on whether or not you enter their classroom quietly. And that's actually, that's an actual example. I heard about it from a student when I first started teaching, that they couldn't be late to their speech and debate class because if they walked in late and the professor was able to hear the door shut behind them, he would take points off of their next assignment. The two things are completely unrelated. Grades are not about behavior. Grades are 100% about whether or not the student masters the information in your class. It's a term called content mastery. And this is one of my favorite quotes. It comes from a dude named Thomas Gusky, who's an educational researcher. And this is what really sort of got me started on my little path, on my little psychotic path about grading. Grading practices are not the result of careful thought or sound evidence. Rather, they are used because teachers experienced these practices as students and having little training or experience with other options continue their use. There's a great quote that I can't take credit for that basically says if part of your narrative as an educator is explaining that you were taught a certain way and it didn't do you any harm, therefore you're going to teach your students that way, I would basically put forth the idea that it did do you harm because you feel the necessity to sort of, defend whatever is going on. I mean, when that's used as a defense, I think we need to be really careful. So, here's the question for many educators. Are your grades broken? Are they accurate? Are they consistent? Are they meaningful? And are they supportive of learning? If they are, stop listening now. No, seriously, don't. I need all the friends I can get. But if you answer yes to all of those things, then you're probably fine. I will say that my grades, I try to make them as accurate and meaningful and supportive of learning as possible. I tend to be fairly inconsistent in that I am one of those people who puts grading off and then grades lots of things at once. And that's a really bad practice. And I recognize it. And I have actually made a concerted effort to adjust that. And one of the ways of adjusting that is give less gradable stuff. Here's one of the things I want to stop for a minute because here's one of the things that always pops up whenever I do this. I've done this workshop a couple of times to a couple of different audiences. And one of the questions that always pops up, and maybe you're going to ask it later, is why grade at all? Can't we just get rid of it and do everything sort of like achievement? And the answer is it's pretty complicated. No, it's pretty complicated because here's why. First, too many institutions use grading, so if you stop using it, you actually create a deficiency for the learner because they have to have information moving forward. Um, if they're planning on continuing their education, they have to have the information of how they did in your class. So completely eliminating grades isn't really the answer. But revising them, fixing them, minimizing them, adjusting them, and trying to be just as fair as possible is really, really kind of my drive. So if that was a question that people had, I wanted to answer it moving forward. So good grades are good communication. Do students know the expectation of the class before they begin an assignment? I know a lot of professors. I've actually been in. I hate to say it because I don't like using Facebook University as evidence, but I've gotten into some arguments on Facebook with a couple of different professors who are in my field and who say things like, "I want my students to strive for excellence, and they need to know that that's how I'm going to be grading them." Excellence is such a stupidly vague term. My idea of what's of excellent work and your idea of excellent work are completely different. So why would you use just an annoyingly nebulous term to define what you expect from your students? Be explicit. Assume that the students have never had a class before. Assume that the students maybe have never had any experience with college before, and be explicit in what your expectations are for the assignment. How do you do that? I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Secondly, do you? This is the really big question. So many times I'm guilty of it. We come up with a lesson and we're like, wow, this is going to be great. I'm going to have my students make an antique microscope as part of a props construction class. How do I grade that? What are the standards? What am I looking for? Are there 5 checkboxes that I can put onto a grading sheet? I have to think about that before I give the assignment. I can't just think about it when I start grading, because here's why. The students have built the assignment and they need to know what the standard is that they're trying to meet. What am I worried about? What am I looking at? Is there one thing that I'm not worried about? They got to know that. And if I don't know it, then I can't communicate it for them. And if they don't know it, how the hell are you supposed to do the assignment? Is your grading the result of a secret code that students must decipher on their own? Is it? I mean, I can't come up with a recent example, but I have met professors who use terms like, I don't know what an A looks like, but I'll know it when I see it. That's so unhelpful. You should just get back in your car and go home. I mean, that's counterintuitive. If your grading is secret, if your grading if you are making the students guess at what an A is and try and jump to grab at some imaginary bar, you are really creating just a negative grading situation. Um, so your grades have to be something that students understand before they start working. Um, Do students only learn the code after? Oh, I hit it twice. Sorry. Oh wow, look at that. It just keeps going. Do students only learn the code after they've made the mistake? So here's another thing that's really important, and it's really important for college level classes. If you're grading a student's grammar in a set design class, you're really not giving them useful information. Is grammar important? Absolutely. Should grammar be put onto a separate grading scale? Yes. Why? Because grammar has nothing to do with set design. So that's something that's really important. Are you grading the students on something that is completely unrelated to the topic? Do you have grading standards that use vague phrases like excellence without any clarification? Um, if students are told to just do college level work, they may not have a frame of reference. And that absolutely drives me nuts because what the hell is college level work? if you use a term, and I'll give you a little spoiler. If you use terms like um, work must be complete, neat, and professionally finished in and presentation quality, and then you augment that by showing the students what you're talking about, that's the kind of thing that you need to do in order to give the student kind of a head start on what you're asking for, because you are a blank page. And so many professors think, well, these students know what to do and they know me. They don't know you. Okay, they don't. And all they know about you is what they've heard. They don't actually know how you grade. So here's the big thing. Is your grading standards based? In other words, instructors in the arts often grade from the gut rather than using a set of standards that can be measured and understood by all users. And it's happened to me. I mean, Jason Foreman's in this group of people, and he's one of my colleagues, and let's all give him a round of applause for putting up with me. But there are occasions where he and I will be teaching different sections of the same class, and I will bring an assignment to him and set it down on his table, knowing that he's seen the same assignment, and I'll say, I mean, it hits all the marks. It does everything it's supposed to do. It answers all the questions, but something about it still feels like a B plus. And he'll look at it and he'll either agree or disagree. There's a name for that, and I'm going to discuss it in just a minute. But a lot of the times it's helpful to give the students a set of standards that they know are normal, are standard. They know, they know are common in your class, right? Grading systems must be built before the class is designed, and at the very least, if they're not built before the class is designed, they must be built before the assignments are given. But ultimately, I build my grade book before I even construct the syllabus, because I want to know what how my grading is going to work. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Rubrics help. I'm going to talk about rubrics in a minute, and I don't want everybody to take away from this little conversation that all Larry said was use a rubric, because that's not all I'm saying. Here's one of the most useful things that I do, and I have discovered other arts educators who I love and admire do, and that is keep work samples. Get permission from students to keep work samples so that you can stand up in front of the class having stripped identities off of the work samples and said, so if you're wondering what this assignment looks like, this is sort of the ideal. This is what I'm looking for. This is okay, and this is probably one that should have been done better or differently. It's not, as long as you have permission to use the student's work, and as long as you've stripped their identity so that it's completely anonymous, and frankly, if you can keep a couple of years worth so that, freshmen aren't seeing sophomores' work in your class, that would be helpful. But keeping work samples is really a useful thing. An introductory class may not have the same set of standards as an advanced class. Excuse me. And as an educator, you kind of need to calibrate to that standard. You need to understand that your advanced classes are going to do things and learn things and produce work that is different from an introductory class. And if you're grading an introductory class using the same set of standards that you use for an advanced class, you're really not being fair, and your grades become kind of inauthentic. Excuse me. So what do I recommend? What's a good way? What's a great model? This comes from a variety of researchers. Gusky is one of them, and then Natasha Huffness. I don't know how to pronounce her name, but you'll see it at the end. She actually came up with the three bucket method, and this is one of my favorites. And and you'll notice there are 4 bullet points. But you create 3 buckets. The 3 buckets are the ones that meet expectations, that meet some of the expectations, and that don't meet the expectations. And here's where fairness comes in. You take the overachievers, the ones who give you a bound copy of a manuscript rather than just a paper, the ones who mat and frame their work before turning it in rather than just turning it in flat. You take those people and you put them in their own pile. Those are the people who exceed expectations. Those are the people who you grade using a whole different set of standards, and maybe it's done interactively with the student. But what you don't do is you don't create four piles and say, well, these people who exceeded all expectations, therefore everybody else in the class is a B and a C. Instead, you take the ones who exceed expectations, you put them in their own pile, knowing that they're going to be a 100 or a 90 or a 95 or whatever it is. And then you take the ones that meet expectations, because honestly, if I'm meeting all the expectations of the assignment, shouldn't I get the top grade? Shouldn't I get an A? If I meet some of the expectations, I should recognize that I've met some of the expectations. I should be advised of the expectations that weren't met and use that information to improve for next time. And if I didn't meet expectations, I should be made aware of the fact that my work is not to the standard set forth by the class. But the bottom line is, the overachievers, they shouldn't set the curve for your class. Okay? Do everybody a favor and set them in their own pile. Hey, look, a blank slide. Students must know the standards before the assignments are given. I'm sort of summarizing some stuff. Know the expectations both of the course and the assignment. Be aware of markers. Like, be aware of phrases that you use when you are talking about something, and you say, for instance, one of my codes that I use, and it's not a hidden code, but it's a way of assessing student work without knocking anybody down a notch. One of the things that I tend to say is, I'm not 100% sure that this is working the way you think it is. That's basically a way of letting a student know that they may not have met the standard. They've done something interesting, but they may need to revisit whatever it is they're doing to see if they can adjust to meet the standard. They have to be able to grow beyond initial grades. They need to be able to expand. They need to be able to, and that's where the setting the overachievers in their own pile. There are always going to be, people there. I'm just going to say it. There are always going to be stage managers in the Introduction to Design class who present really high finish work that may not necessarily be the best design, but it's really well finished. And those people are in their own pile. So the other three piles, the other three buckets, need to be able to grow beyond those initial grades. And then they need to be able to offer feedback in a meaningful and effective way. And that's confusing. Students must be able to, that's not what I really mean. What I mean is they must be able to receive feedback in a meaningful and effective way. And the problem is, if you're just grading with a red pen and you're writing a single comment at the top of the page and then putting a letter above that, you're not really offering a tremendous amount of meaningful feedback. Grading has to be tailored to the needs of the student. You have to be able to listen. And that's why I use the term authentic grading. You have to be able to stand and listen to the learner and see where they are. So here's one of my little truisms, and that is, a bad idea doesn't become a good idea simply because we write it down and everyone agrees. The same can be said for grading practices. This is about syllabi. That story that I told you about the professor who made door closing a standard for grading. And you know what the students told me? They said that the origin of this quote, they said, well, he wrote it in the syllabus. Just because I've given you warning that I'm going to be an idiot doesn't necessarily make being an idiot okay. All right. And I know idiot's a pejorative term, but I was annoyed by that. Your syllabus is the guide to how you teach, assess, and grade your class. It is not a constitution. It may need to change based on the needs of the learners in your class. It may not cover every contingency, and just because you codify something doesn't make it fair. So you have to be willing to revisit your syllabus as you're constructing your class and as you're teaching the class. My syllabi, I'm now on version 3, and my students know it. Why? Because I've moved some dates around. Why? Because we had ice days, and we didn't have time to talk about things in depth. And so I've had to move some things around. I've had to make some things due later than they normally were. And a few things I would have normally done as presentations, I did as gallery walkthroughs. You have to be flexible in your class, and you have to be flexible with your grading, and you have to recognize that if you're having a hard time maintaining your schedule because of various outside forces, your students are having the same difficulty, and you need to be aware of it. Do you need to be a soft touch? No. Do you need to soft pitch everything in the class? No. Do you need to eliminate grades? No. But do you need to maybe make your grading a little bit more fluid? Yes. And you got to be able to talk to your students about it. And here's the really big thing. If you can't explain your grades to your students, you got a problem. If your explanation of your grades when a student comes to you and asks you for clarification is, read the comments that I wrote, that ain't doing it. And honestly, in a college level course, students are paying too much money for that to have you dismiss them out of hand. One of the things that I talk about that I'm going to talk about next is the concept of inter-rater reliability, and that takes us back to that moment in Jason Foreman's office where I set down a project and he and I look at it together. Inter-rater reliability. Academic freedom is important. Many educators don't discuss their grading practices with their peers, but it's really important to know what an A looks like in another class because it may help to inform your standards, and it may help you to go, I mean, there have been times where I've walked into Jason's office and I'm like, that's a C, and Jason looks at it and goes, that's an A minus. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah, I mean, and he explains what his point of view is, and I listen to him, and then I make a decision. But it's really important if you have multiple sections of the same class for fairness, for academic fairness. Yes, my freedom is important, but the students' freedom and the students' understanding of what an A is going to be in my class is super important. So knowing what A's look like, knowing when I'm just going to say it. Knowing when you have colleagues who mistake just being mean for rigor, just being a hard grader isn't rigor. Rigor means that the student rises to the standard and does the work. Rigor doesn't mean that you go in and grade the crap out of their paper and make them feel this big, okay? Knowing what an A looks like in another class may help to inform your standards, and understanding the bell curve of a particular class may aid in creating useful grading. So if I know that there are a bunch of people who are on the high end of the bell curve, who are the ones who are like, who are the ones who are, publishing and binding their research for your class, I may adjust the standard for that class to better reflect those students. But I have to know that. I have to know what my students look like. So, rubrics or communication. What's a rubric? I'm going to show you two examples, and if you like them, you can send me an email, and I'll send you a copy of them. Create a rubric based on expectations and standards gleaned from goals and objectives. In other words, that's what do I want the students to know? Share the rubric with the students and post it. Use it every time you grade. And revise it as needed through self-reflection and student feedback. So just because I'm going to show you a rubric that I've used before doesn't mean that I haven't adjusted this rubric. But this was a super handy one. This is a good one that I just got out of the back of an arts educator's book. And it's a 5-point rubric, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So take a look at this. This is it's the exceeds, meets some, below, and does not meet. And you see, you can read through this. I don't need to do slideshow karaoke with you. But the work is beyond the skill level set forth. This is exceeds. The work exceeds expectations, the assignment, in level of finish and overall quality. The work includes features that expand or enhance the assignment. The work is original, creative, artistic, and unique. The assignment includes more than one solution or project based on the same prompt or problem. The work is professional quality. Those terms are pretty easy to describe and explain, but the last one, the work is professional quality, that's where it's super handy to walk into the class with an example and say, this is what I'm talking about. This is professional quality work. Or you can say professional quality means that everything is printed, everything is mounted, everything lines up and aligns and is square. You've paid attention to graphic quality. There are no torn edges. All of the cut edges are straight. Like that's a really easy way to outline that for students. Um, and explain when you're cutting something with an X-Acto knife, use a straight edge so that you cut straight. Really, really straightforward. That's one rubric that I like. And here's another one. This is just a basic. This is super basic one. And it's the same sort of standards, but it sets it up in 100. This is a 4-point rubric. I actually really like and have been using the 5-point rubric just because it gives me that outlier group. But this is a group, it exceeds expectations, it's neat, well organized, creative, and well arranged. It's well formatted with creative ideas, goes beyond that which has been covered or requested. Meets expectations, is neat, is well organized. And in advanced level classes, one of the other things that I include that I haven't included here is the work is original and not derivative. Okay, which is an important feature for an advanced level class, but may not necessarily be that important for an entry level class. This is the quote that gave me the sort of jumping off point. Harry Wong is a really good, if you're an educator and you want to read some really amazing educational theory as well as just experience, like 40 years of experience in classrooms. Harry Wong's book, The First Day of School, is actually a really good book. It's geared for like public school educators, but I've been able to glean a lot of useful stuff out of that book. And so here are some resources. Meaningful Grading, a guide for for faculty in the arts. That's a fantastic book, and that's the Natasha Hognes Holmgren Springborg. Assessing Learning in the Classroom. Ken O'Connor, How to Grade for Learning. Tom Gusky, Communicating Student Learning. And then Robert Marzano, Transforming Classroom Grading. All super useful books that give you sort of a jumping off point. My whole point about this is that grading has to be yours. It has to be something that you create and that you own. It can't be something that somebody else has told you to do, and it can't be based on what somebody else did to you. It has to be sort of original. And so it's really important to go back and spend some time looking at the assignments and ask yourself, what do I want the students to be able to do when they're done with this assignment? For example, that microscope assignment, that antique microscope assignment. The things that I told this when I wrote the assignment, I said I'm going to be looking at your research. I'm going to be looking at how you transition from research to drawings to the object. And then when it comes to the object, I'm going to be looking at the level of finish, the quality of paint, the quality of found objects that you use to create it, and then from a 30-foot distance, believability. And the believability may include outside jurors. It may include other professors to come in and look at the items sitting on a table 30 feet away and sort of rank them. Do I use the other professors' rankings for my grades? No. My grades have to be mine, and my students are depending on me to give them a grade. But I'm going to use the other professors as sort of guideposts to confirm what I may think or believe or see in the grading. And with that, I don't know what time it is. It is 7:47, so I have a few minutes for questions, I believe. Right? Erin, help me out. Do I have a few minutes for
Absolutely. Questions? We've got some questions for you. Are you ready?
Fantastic.
All right.
I'm always ready.
Great. All right. So how do or should grades relate to the professional world? Do you grade based off of what might be expected as baseline professional standards, or does basing grades off of professional standards do harm to the educational setting?
I don't think the professional world folks are going to be mad about this, but I'm just going to say, Alice McGuire's idea. Alice is the prop master at the Goodman. Alice McGuire's idea of what a great prop is, and Karen's idea of what a great prop is, and your idea of what a great prop is going to be different. So no, I have to actually, I love professional standards, and what I do say is that your work has to be finished. Like I can't show up working in the professional world and turn in incomplete items and say I'm done and hope that's good enough. So that's where the professional world, professionalism is finish your work, and if you can't finish, explain to me that you can't finish it, and explain to me why. But I also understand that frequently there are other features that are involved. So my grades kind of have to be native to my classroom. Does that mean that I don't bring a professional eye to it? No, I mean, I'm assuming, again, we can ask Jason, he's in the room, he hired me, but I'm assuming that part of the reason that I was hired is because I have professional experience and I can look at something and go, yeah, I'm not sure I do it like that, and that's where it comes from. So, does that help?
I think so. All right, another question for you. Should attendance have an effect on the grade if they
Uh,
still turn in all assignments?
yes. Yeah, I mean, somewhere attendance has to matter. There's this fallacy that if I turn in all the work and it looks really good, and I don't show up to any of the classes and I don't attend any of the process information, I just turn in finished products. No, sorry, that's not why you're coming to school. You're ostensibly coming to school to learn, and you can't know everything if you are, if you're in a, I mean, I don't mean to be, it sounds like a humble brag, like you're going to learn a lot from me. But the reality of it is, you're paying to go to school, and so yeah, attendance matters. Usually, the way I work it, and I explain this in the syllabus. The way I work it is, you get two mulligans, you get two unexcused, excused, whatever they are, absences, and then after those two, we start discussing what's going to happen to the grades on your work, or what's going to happen whether if you've turned in all the work but you've missed 6 classes. There's a very real possibility you're not going to pass the class. Six out of, we'll say in a 16-week class, 6 out of 32 meetings. No, being there is important. Just like if you want to put that into the professional world, um, um, showing up for work matters. There's going to come a point where you not showing up for work, even if you're doing great stuff while you're there, isn't going to fly. I saw Carly said something, and I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah,
I'm
we've
not
got a couple
going
of
into
things in
the
here.
chat room, but
Was there any adjustment you had to make due to COVID teaching that you've kept?
yeah, yes. And that is, I mean, I've always been sort of super flexible. Like if I look at the way a semester is laying out, and I listen to how much I've talked in the class. Again, I'm looking at you, Jason. How much I've talked in the class, because I tend to talk a lot. But if I look at that and I recognize that maybe we've pushed something off the deep end of the syllabus, I'll adjust the syllabus because it just feels like it needs to be adjusted. So yeah, I'm one of the things that COVID taught me is that I can be really flexible with my stuff and still get decent quality work and still get decent quality instruction. So yeah. It also makes it easier for me. We haven't been afforded the ability recently, but it also makes it easier for me to just jump online when I need to jump online. I'm much more adept at, like, I taught a watercolor technique thing using my laptop, and then a counter-mounted camera where they could see my hands. And I mean, I felt it worked really well, and my students turned in really high quality watercolors, so I can only assume I did it right.
There you go.
Or else they're just
Use the grading to find out
right.
how well you're doing. So when it comes to teaching people of multiple skill levels and people at sort of different stages in their careers, do you have any tricks on how to switch your standards between those classes to provide the most effective feedback for the individuals?
Yes. Um, so I mean, I'm always fairly conversational, but one of my goals is I try not to teach anything that I don't know well enough to to talk about without notes. And so in more advanced classes, I've really I watched I attended a workshop with a guy who teaches musicology on our campus, and who talked about the fact that, everybody has rules about laptops and phones in their class, and put away your devices. And he was like, if I'm teaching a class and I need to discuss Chopin, I'm not going to stand up and lecture about what his dates are. I'm going to say to the students, pull out your phone and tell me when Chopin was born and when he composed music. And I've discovered that that's actually super helpful. One of the things that I do with all of my classes that I hadn't done before is I create a Google Drive folder for the class. And I offer the students the opportunity to create an ongoing slideshow in that folder. And then I come in, for instance, when I'm talking about, if I'm in Intro to Design and I'm talking about line shape and form, I'll ask students to go find the examples of it online during the class and upload them to the slideshow. And when I come into a more advanced class, I may change it and re-up it and say, I'll put the word, for lack of a better word, I'll put the word ormolu up on the screen and I'll say, tell me about ormolu. And my students will then get online and find me historical markers, they'll find me examples, and it's a great way to activate the classroom, to get the students who are already cruising around on the internet looking for stuff to cruise around and look for some of the things that I want them to find. So yeah, I've discovered that model actually works really well across learning styles, and that everybody seems to appreciate it, and that people who are less inclined to contribute are more comfortable contributing in that format than they are in standing up and talking. So
It's
that's
also a
that's
sneaky
been a
way to
real
teach research.
equalizer for me. What's that?
It's a sneaky way to teach how to research too.
Yeah, yeah, and it's also a neat way to teach. It's a neat way to teach search engine algorithms, because they'll all come up with, it's like when I ask for the term, when I put the term commode up when we're talking about French art and design, and 5 or 6 of them show me toilets, and it's like, no, yeah, okay, I mean, yes, technically yes, but let's go and look for something else. So yeah.
All right. So if a student is taking a lab class building items for shows, how do you write a syllabus with that when you don't have the designs in advance?
Give it to me again. I'm sorry.
All right. So if a student's taking a lab class building props for shows, how do you write the syllabus for that class when you don't have the designs for the shows they're going to be building?
I don't know that I can. I mean, honestly, that's not really a fair way. I hate to say it, but
Yeah.
that's not really a fair way to run a class. But by being as vague as possible, it sounds stupid, but by being very general and using that rubric, we can create the assignments. For instance, we did a lab class where the students created the puppets that were being used in Children of Eden, the animal puppets, and and I knew that was going to be a thing, but I didn't know the format in which it would take, how it would work. But I mean, the rubric stays the same. It's like, is the work professional quality? Will it stay together? I mean, you can write a rubric that's based on a prop lasting for the run of a show versus turning in something that may not need to stay together long enough for the student to get out of the classroom. Similarly, an example that I use is, it's really funny. I didn't realize I would have to do it until I started teaching props specifically, but I set a weight standard for everything. So it's like, if you're making a fake milkshake for a class, and it weighs 1.5 pounds, you may need to reevaluate how you made that milkshake, because I don't know that I can send 1.5 pound glass of anything out onto stage. So, I mean, I used the standards of what makes a good prop, and then plug in the actual specifics later.
Nice. And so talking about the sort of conversational research question from that, do you ever run into any ownership or collaboration issues with sharing the Google Drive and having students uploading into that?
I haven't. I mean, Carly's asking this, and she's taken my class, so um, I haven't. I haven't this year. I have seen a couple of times when common images show up. Um, But one of the nice things about Google Drive is that it gives me, because I'm the owner of the drive, it gives me the opportunity to go in and check creation dates and who the contributors were. And you know, when everybody across the class had the slideshows, the one comment that I got from students was the slideshows were super helpful because when I felt like I was super really behind, I wasn't necessarily going into other people's slideshows to cheat. I was just going in to confirm that I wasn't as behind as I thought I was. And in general, I mean, I will say the last class that I taught where I used this model, the work that I got was all pretty original and looked pretty authentic. And if I need to go in and check a time signature or check a creator signature, I can do that.
Great. Well,
But I
thank
try not
you.
to.
Thank you so much. This has been really informative, really great, and really like has me thinking about, even how I work with interns and apprentices, even though I'm not directly grading people, but sort of I can take sort of what you've talked about to apply to my
And
not
that's the thing is
so
it's not
formal
just
teaching.
grading, it's offering feedback in
Yeah,
general. And some people offer feedback really well and some people don't. And sometimes, you know, being brutally honest is helpful and sometimes being brutally honest can be incredibly damaging. So it's
absolutely.
just, I mean, and I'm again, I love her. I worked for Alice McGuire at the Goodman Theater probably a long time ago, 30 years ago or thereabouts. And Alice was one of those prop masters who you'd say, you know, you'd be standing at your table and you'd say, "How does this look?" And she'd come up and go, "I don't know. I'm not sure I would have done it like this." And it's like, Alice, you're standing literally 6 inches away. And she was like, "Okay, but okay, so." You know, and she could be very, she, you know, she had a little, I got along well with her because I'm a sarcastic person, but she had a level of sarcasm where it was like, you know, you have to be careful what you ask because she's going to give you a 100% honest answer. And it might be, wow, if I had to put that on stage right now, I jump out a window, you know? I mean, that, you know, so you have to be, but she is her own person and
Yeah.
it worked for her.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insight and those resources. Thank you so, so much.
It was my
Great to
pleasure.
have you here.
Thanks. Thanks everybody for coming.
All right, friends. Now it's time to get out your Sharpies that hopefully have not been stolen from you and mark your calendars for the next Spaminar. So it is the first day of spring today. And so on April 10th, in honor of Earth Day, which is coming up, we're going to be talking about ways to protect the environment while doing the jobs we love in a Spaminar that we are calling Greening Our Theater Practices. It's going to be presented by Cass Westover. It's going to be really great. You are not going to want to miss that. And so now some of you are probably wondering how to become a member of SPAM. So if you're a working prop manager, director, supervisor, master, or some other similar title in a nonprofit theater or opera company, or an educator who teaches prop classes or prepares students for a career in props and are interested in joining SPAM, please send our membership committee an email for more information. That email address, I believe it's in the links that Karen just posted. Yes. So membership@propmanagers.org. That'll get you in touch with our membership community or membership committee, and they can certainly help you join our merry band of prop making folks. So you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Links are in the chat. This very Spaminar is going to be live, is going to be on YouTube shortly. So if you missed anything, you can always go back and check. So Spaminar is produced by the Society of Properties Artisan Managers with very special thanks eternal thank yous to some SPAM members: Patrick Drone, who is the properties director and lecturer at the University of Michigan; Larry Heyman, associate professor in properties design and fabrication at OCU School of Theater, and also a fantastic presenter tonight; Ben Homan, properties director at the Utah Shakespeare Festival; Stacy Hornharper, properties manager at Salem State University; Mickey Kulas, who's the prop master at First Stage; Amy Peter, props master at the theater school at DePaul University; and Karen Rabe Vance, associate prop master at the Geffen Playhouse. Thank you all again so much for watching, for attending, and once again, keep your suggestions for future Spaminars coming. We want to know what it is you want to learn about. So go ahead and hit us up on our socials. Those links are there. Let us know what you want us to do presentations about. All right, so prop on, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much, everybody.